many of you know that that Allie's been job hunting lately, which means that I too have been kind of on the lookout for ways to supplement our family income. And I was reading Time Magazine the other day and I found it. This is it. This is the call of God right here in Time Magazine. And it turns out that there's this article, probably one of the best articles in Time Magazine in a while, and I read Time pretty religiously, but probably one of the best articles I've read, has said that there is a new and booming industry entirely built off of somebody going into somebody else's home and telling them what they need to throw away. Where do I sign up, right? Allie said, oh, let me loose, and it turns out I Googled it, and there's a national organization of professional organizers, they call themselves. And by the way, the answer is, it turns out everything. You pay me $2,000, I go into your house, look around, and say, yeah, throw all this junk away. Give me my check, and this is a great job. And I called my mom and I said, Mom, this is a thing now apparently. And my mom says, I know, I have a friend who does it. She's making bank doing it. So it's actually a thing. This isn't some cliche thing they're doing on the East Coast. This is national trend here that people are paying people thousands of dollars to go inside your house and tell you to throw everything away and then help you organize what's left too. They're not, they're worth a little bit of money, I think, and so you can look up the resources and find them. But the article kind of dipped into the deeper meaning of stuff and used that as sort of a gateway to talk about America's very large and very growing junk addiction. We are addicted to stuff, and there was just so many great stuff in this article. I'll share a few quotes with you. Oh, first of all, 75% of garages look like that. Only 25% of Americans can park their car in their garage. And I confess that I'm not in the 25%. We have a carport now, which is great, but our garage at our last house, not so great. And so anybody want to show their hands and say, I'm in the 75%? Is it 75% of us? I thought it might be. And so U.S. children, this one fascinates me because I can relate. U.S. children are 3.1% of the world's children, but they own 40% of the world's toys. 40% of that 40% is in my basement right now. And most toy rooms look like that. It goes on. We own more stuff per individual in our country than any country ever in the history of the world. The average American owns more junk than anybody else. We're number one, and so we beat them all, yeah. So there's some great quotes about this. One is Eleanor Ochs, an anthropologist, studies culture in humans. She did a 10-year study on hyperacquisition, what they call hoarding. She studied it for a decade long, and she said our stuff is not inert. Inert means powerless. It's not powerless. It has consequences. It's not just meaningful junk that piles up in your garage. She said there's a power behind it. I would argue there's maybe even like a demonic power behind it. I might go there. That there seems to be this spiritual realm of junk collection. And Eleanor says that one of the things it does is the more stuff you own, the more stressed out you are. And the more stressed out you are, the more likely you are to get sick. And the more likely you are to get sick, the more likely you are to die. Your stuff is trying to kill you, guys. That's what she found out. 10 years of study, and she said, your stuff is trying to kill you. And I know this is true. I know people who collect junk, and they're unhappy, they're mean, they're sick all the time, and they die way sooner than other people die. She says, this is a problem. And so one of the other great quotes, this is by an environmentalist, Annie Leonard. She said, this is the problem, and I love this quote. We're going to come back to this. She says, for a huge percentage of this country, there just isn't an economic obstacle to having the illusion of luxury. Luxury is still rather expensive, but it's pretty cheap to pretend you're luxurious. It's just stuff is so cheap. I knew a guy, lived a few doors down from me, didn't have a dime to his name, no income, broke, the definition of broke, and yet he had a 60-inch flat-screen TV and a 4x4 truck in his driveway and furniture in his house. Not great furniture, but furniture in his house, beaten up, and dishes in the kitchen and a bed. And so even it's said that even the poorest people in the U.S. are still wealthier than 10%, are still wealthier than 90% of the world because stuff is just so prolific. Even if you can't afford it, you can just go to a dump and collect it and just find it. And I know people who've done that, and so we can pretend to have luxury. It's just so easy. But the best quote of the article, my favorite, this actually came from the text itself, is consumption and acquisition are incontrovertibly a part of the American condition. Incontrovertibly means it's not a controversy, it's just obvious. That the American condition is we consume and acquire and consume and acquire and it's consume and acquire. That's sort of who we are. I love that quote, but I disagree with it. And here's what I disagree with. I don't think it's just us. We can pick on ourselves if we want, but I think we probably showcase it more because we're the kind of the economic top dog right now. And yet I think this is just incontrovertibly a part of the human condition, that this is just part of what it means to be human and not necessarily a good part. And it seems like it goes clear back to Adam and Eve in the garden. You guys know the story that God put a tree there, said don't eat of this tree. They ate of the tree. And the first consequence, what I would call the natural consequence, before God showed up and made all kinds of punishments, the very first sort of consequence of them disobeying God and eating of that tree is that they single-handedly created the fashion industry. They did it themselves, right? Read with me. This is Genesis 3:7. It says, after they ate of the tree, the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. And now, several thousand years later, we still have all kinds of industries who are devoted to making ever more elaborate and complex fig leaves that we can just throw onto and over ourselves and in our garage and in our toy rooms to make us feel better about ourselves and to tell the world lies about who we really are. Consumption and acquisition are part of the human condition. We all have that stuff that we like to just throw on ourselves to make ourselves lie and tell lies to ourselves and to each other and to God about who we really are. We do it out of shame. We do it out of fear. We do it out of pride a little bit. And this is just who we are. I have to have this illusion of luxury. I have to create this illusion that I'm a luxurious, well put together, cool person, and I have to invest in all this stuff to help me feed that lie about myself. Well, you're holding palm branches today, but before we get to Palm Sunday, I want to talk about a few modern day fig leaves. And note that as we get going, I'm not saying everybody who owns this stuff or keeps up with this industry is doing it for the wrong reasons. But I'm kind of picking on the commercials, that these industries kind of have the worst commercials that feed into this fig leaf lie. So don't get offended too quickly. So the first is I want to pick on the fashion industry. I wanted to go back to that illusion of luxury, that we're creating this illusion. And so I want to pick on the fashion industry. I have like this love-hate thing going with the fashion industry. I want to look nice. I want to look professional. I'm wearing a tie today. I gave in this morning and chose it very, very carefully. And so I want to look professional and confident. I want to dress well. I do. But at the same time, it's kind of a fool's errand. One is my mom and sister. I love them to death. But when I was growing up, they sometimes were just way too dedicated to reciting the creeds of fashion as if they were like biblical creeds, God will hate you if you wear that shorts, as you walk out the door. And so I kind of just, as a young kid, just that frustrated me. Another part of it is every time you figure out a rule of fashion, they go and change the dumb rule on you, some fashion. So the minute I start wearing stripes, they switch to plaid. The minute I switch to plaid, everybody goes back to like collared single color shirts. The minute I go khaki, everybody goes jeans. The minute I go jeans, everybody goes cargo. It's expensive, trying to keep up with all this stuff. The minute I buy all these clothes, I end up having to change them all to follow some rule that's just going to change in another month. But with that said, I'm told mostly by the commercials, but also by that TV show, What Not to Wear, that the idea of the fashion industry, my wife's had it on in the room when I've been there, that the fashion industry operates off of hiding your physical weaknesses in quotes. They're not actually weaknesses. But the idea of the fashion industry for women and men is that you obviously have things about yourself that you hate and that the culture might hate as well. And so the idea is you have to go through all this process, hours and hours of shopping, hours in front of the mirror, hours choosing clothes, just to sort of find that right outfit in those silhouettes. You can see all the outfit that will help you hide the truth about that thing you hate about yourself the most and accent sort of the thing you like about yourself the most. And so I don't like this thing about myself, but if I wear this piece of clothing, nobody will know it's there. I could just lie to everybody by wearing this piece of clothing, and nobody will know it's there, and everybody will think I'm a confident, mature person who loves myself, when deep down inside it's that I actually don't love myself. I actually hate myself. And it creates all kinds of diseases, anorexia, bulimia, even obesity. It just feeds all this body image stuff that helps. Now, I'm not saying everybody who wears fashionable falls into this trap, but I am saying that from what I'm seeing from the stuff that industry puts out, that's one of the fig leaves. That even though our clothes have gotten more sophisticated, and even though they help us look nicer and they're not just two leaves sewn together, it still is the Adam and Eve fig leaf lie that we hate ourselves. Let's slap some stuff together and hide ourselves up. And so next, I realize I may be picking on the women in the room, so I'll be fair, and let's talk about the car industry. That's a truck. I seriously, I pulled that off of the car dealer for Layton. So that truck, $75,000. It's yours today. If you have the money, you could drive over there and get it. And so the idea of guys do cars like girls do clothes. Sometimes I know some guys who do the clothes thing, and I know some girls who do the car things. But at least from the commercials of the cars, the idea is, and women, here's the secret. Men, I hope you'll forgive me for this. Men tend to be just as insecure as women. We just culturally cover it up a little bit. So deep down inside, I'm insecure. I feel powerless. I feel weak. I don't feel like I'm as manly as I should be. And I drive this junky 4-door car sedan that goes from 0 to 60 in maybe 5.5 minutes, right? So the idea is I got to cover that up. I got to sew some fig leaves together, but this time I got to sew an engine together, bolt an engine together, and I can go down and I can go into massive amounts of debt and get this 350 horsepower, 2,800 RPM, 1-ton truck. And then I can drive it around town and I can rev the engine, especially if one of those lousy dinky men in one of those dinky little sedans pulls up. I can rev the engine and I can smoke them, and I can pull big things. I can pull big boats and big trailers with my big truck, all so that people won't know that I feel weak inside and I feel like I'm not measuring up to some outside standard of manliness that the culture imposes on us. And so even though our engines are quite sophisticated, as Perry learned yesterday, replacing the timing chain. You don't rip anything. Even though they're extremely sophisticated, in often ways, at least from what I'm understanding from the commercials, they're just sophisticated fig leaves, stuff we're frantically slapping together so that we can hide the truth and tell lies about ourselves. Next, I'm probably going to jump out of the frying pan into the fire, but let's talk about Facebook. Shall we? Well, can we, Brad Paisley, some of you probably aren't country fanatics, but Brad Paisley kind of put it best in his song Online. We'll see if I kept the lyrics up there. I didn't. Here are the lyrics of Brad. Even if you don't like country, this is brilliant satire here. He says, I work down at the Pizza Pit. I drive an old Hyundai. I still live with my mom and dad. I'm 5'3" and overweight. I'm a sci-fi fanatic, a mild asthmatic. I've never been to second base, but there's a whole other me that you need to see if you just go check out MySpace. This was back when MySpace was popular. Because online, he says, online? I'm out in Hollywood. I'm 6'5" and I look really good. I drive a Maserati. I'm a black belt in karate, and I love a good glass of wine. I love that song. I'm overweight. I'm in mom and dad's basement. But if you talk to me online, I'm a really cool person, right? And so I know that's not many of you, maybe any of you in the room. And yet at the same time, I'm kind of noticing this trend. And we typically, when Facebook broke, we kind of all told our children, which was good advice, that be careful what you put on there because now you're talking to an audience of 300-400 people on average, sometimes even thousands. And so we told our kids, be very, very careful what you put on there. And our kids learned well because now the kids are being so careful about what they put on Facebook that they're editing and redacting everything about who they are to try to present this vision of themselves that isn't anywhere close to who they actually are. And I have to admit, I'm a pastor and I play that game. I love text messaging because I can type my text in and then I can read it and say, how does that sound? Oh, that sounds like me, but I don't want it to sound like me. Delete, 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 delete. I want it to sound like a great pastor, that I'm not. And so type it again. Hey, that sounds better. Well, maybe change that word, maybe change that word. And next thing you know, I'm sending you these text messages that came straight from God, and you think, wow, best pastor ever. When really what I wanted to say is vacuum the church already, But instead I'm saying, the church carpets are dirty and it'd be nice if somebody could vacuum them, and so you can hide yourself, and we're doing this more and more on Facebook, so that now we're lying to the world about who we are. And it used to be we could all just get in a room and we'd have these conversations, and I would lose control and just say, would somebody vacuum already? And then we'd all have to deal with it, and you'd have to decide if you're going to fire me or convince me to vacuum the carpet. I have to convince you, and that's how intimacy forms, is when we're honest with each other. Now we don't have to do that. We could just pretend to be something we're not on Facebook and via text messages and emails, and they're just fig leaves we're sewing together to hide the truth about who we really are. So now I'm going to go from like the fire to like the coals, because I do want to talk about the religious industry, religious products. One of the things you can do on Facebook is that you can find all these very well-meaning Christian-related they call them memes. Like click like if you like Jesus. If you don't click like, Satan's going to kind of open up hell and swallow you whole in the next 10 minutes. Have you seen those? And so that's one of the things you can do. And I know people, I know this probably not people in the room, but I know people who are just lousy Christians. They don't pray, they don't go to church, they don't get together with people at all, they're mean, and yet they can go online and they can plaster spiritual-sounding memes all over their page to try to create this illusion that I have this deep spirituality. And so going back to that Annie Leonard quote, I would argue it's never been easier than it is today to sustain the illusion of spirituality when your spiritual depth is like there. It's never been easier to pretend to be a Christian. I can go to the Christian bookstore and I can buy all this stuff, and I can have the mugs, and I can have the inspirational posters, and I can plaster them everywhere. And so when you walk into my house, you're like, wow, he's so spiritual, and I could be playing video games in the basement, you wouldn't know it, And I can like all that stuff on Facebook and log off and be lazy and log back. I don't do this. I fight that temptation a lot. But I can do that, and you'll think, those of you who are on Facebook, those of you who aren't will see right through it, but those of you who are online know that we'll just think, hey, he's such a great pastor. Look, he liked Jesus before hell swallowed him whole, And so it's creating sort of this illusion. It's creating this illusion of spirituality, this illusion of luxury, and it's just modern day fig leaves we're slapping together, throwing over ourselves so that we can lie to ourselves about ourselves and lie to others about who we really are. But Jesus is better than Jesus-themed coffee mugs. Can I say that? Jesus is better than Facebook. Jesus is better than a 4x4 truck. Jesus is better than the latest styles of fashion, whether they be plaid or stripes or single color. Jesus is better than all this stuff, than garages full of junk. That this relationship we have with Jesus and with each other through the cross is better than all of this illusion and lies we can tell. And yet when I look around, I sometimes wonder, do we really get that? But that's okay, because when we go back to Palm Sunday, the very first one, they were holding palm branches and they were throwing their coats down. But I kind of, when I read the story, I'm wondering, were they really holding palm branches or fig leaves? Because here's the thing that many have pointed out. 5 days later, these people who are taking off their overcoats for Jesus are the ones yanking Jesus' clothes off of him. And the ones stripping their trees to get branches to wave are the ones using branches and sewing them together so that they can whip Jesus and strip his skin off of his back. And then, of course, those stripping the trees were cutting down the trees and bolting them together so that they could hang Jesus on a tree, so that by Good Friday, what we end up with is one very naked, very vulnerable, very honest God hanging there saying, this is who I am, bleeding, bloody, no fig leaves anywhere, and a bunch of very well-clothed people clapping and saying, we got him, we killed him. And so even though they're palm branches, I think they're waving fig leaves. We want a God, we want a Savior, but we want a Savior who will give us more stuff. We all want a Savior who will bring honesty to us. We don't want a Savior who's going to force us to be vulnerable. We'd rather have a Savior that just sort of overthrows the current stuff giver, the king, and becomes a new stuff giver, a new stuff king, and gives us all the stuff. The new stuff king isn't giving us the stuff. He's giving the bad guys the stuff. So we want the good stuff king to come in and overthrow the other stuff king, the bad stuff king, and he'll give us all this good stuff that we can still use to sustain the lie about ourselves. But instead, how Jesus saves us is by hanging on the cross and saying, this is the way to live. We've sometimes made a mistake in preaching the cross as this technicality. It's just a technical thing. It's just sort of a loophole in the law that Jesus was able to take advantage of. And in our tradition, we've always believed that the cross is the very full revelation of who God is. And the central command, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke at least, is deny yourself. For purposes of today, we might say, get rid of all the stuff you're using to sustain this illusion of luxury and spirituality. Deny yourself. Pick up your cross and follow me. Deny yourself. Take off all that stuff, those fig leaves you're piling on. Because all of humanity and all of God is perfectly represented for us in the image of the naked, bleeding, bloody Jesus hanging on the cross, saying, follow me here. Now, I know what you're thinking. In some matter or another, you're thinking that, Pastor Kevin, vulnerability, being vulnerable with people, that's the best way to get crucified. And I've been there. I've been there. I walked into a rescue mission thinking the best way to be a good pastor here is to be vulnerable with homeless men who are better at playing the fig leaf game than anybody in this room are, even though they don't have a dime to their name. And I got crucified. Over and over and over and over again, I got crucified. And it hurts. And it's mean. And it's frustrating. And I find myself sitting in empty sanctuaries for an hour, staring up at the cross behind me, thinking, how do I get up from this? How do I go on from this? God, is there a fig leaf you could give me to sew back over this wound and this pain and this hurt and this shame that I'm feeling? God, I just got crucified. Can you help me? Can you empower me? Can you give me some sword I can use to stab the people who crucified me, And all I can say about those moments is that that's where God meets us. That when we're vulnerable with each other and we finally tell someone the truth about ourselves, and then they use it to burn us and burn us bad, as frustrating and aggravating and angry as that is, I have always felt the Spirit of the Lord sitting right next to me, saying, now you get it. Now you get it, God. Now you get it, Rosewood Lane Church of the Nazarene. And the best thing about it is that those who get crucified also have a great way of being raised from the dead. But now I'm preaching Easter. You'll have to come back next week for that. Would the worship team please come forward?